Hi everyone. So today I'm doing a quick demonstration of how I do my tying on of my projects. Now I would say I use this method of tie on for probably 80 to 90% of them. There are going to be some yarns, if you're working with something like bamboo or tencel for your warp, this is probably not the technique for you, but this works exceptionally well for things like cotton, and this is cotton 8-2 that I'm going to be demonstrating with. Or it also works for like sock yarns, wools of that type. If it's a super bulky or super slippery yarn, you might want to default to a different method for tying on your warp. Mostly what I'm doing this for is because I want to demonstrate how you can get by with a lot less tie-on waste in the front if you find a different way to tie on, perhaps a different way than what you do normally. I have already threaded everything. I went ahead and I've advanced my warp to the point where my warp ends, the cut ends, are about an inch or two past the beam. And I've got my apron rod in what I feel is a comfortable place. The other thing I like to do is I like to tie on in small bundles. And by small, I mean usually like this is an 8 or 12.5 dent Heddle. So I'm going to try to find clusters of about 8 ends. If that seems like a lot of tying on to you, it is. I'm basically looking towards my front Heddle and thinking, okay, I want about 5 slots, maybe a little bit more, but I think 5 slots will do it. And so I'm doing small bundles for a couple of reasons. First is I just get better tension. The smaller the bundles you have for your tie-on, the more likely you're going to end up with a more even tension across the way, because nothing is traveling at an angle across the warp as it's coming to my front beam. And so I'm going to start at the very center. Some people say they were taught to go left to right, right to left, center out, center in, or outsides in. I start with one bundle in the center. And if this were just a plain weave project, I would sort it into slots and holes. I'm just making a nice even gap here for me to put my fingers through. And then I'm going to bring it to the front apron rod, and I'm going to split the 2 halves, one to either side. And the first few are always a little awkward because, again, we've got this apron rod. And I'm going to make like this winged W shape here. So you can see the W forming here. I'm going to bring them closer together. I'm exaggerating it for the camera so you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to bring these out, and then I'm going to take and tie this like I'm tying my shoe. The first step, you do the left over right. But I'm going to do it one more time. Left over right again, and then I'm going to yank that down. And the way you tighten these is to pull up towards the heddle and then pull on the wings. That's pretty secure right there. Here's how this all came about. I used to do this particular knot, and then I would come back in and I would tie a bow on top of it because that was how the person I did. They didn't do this knot. They did a different knot. But I learned pretty quickly if I did this knot, I wouldn't have to tie the bow on so fast because this is going to hold. Really, the only way to get this knot to come loose at this point after I've gotten it really snug down is to quite literally release the tension, and then I can kind of pull that knot out. So I'll demonstrate it with that one again, but you can see it's not easy even to get this knot out with the tension off of the threads. So I had started doing just I think this is the first half of what's called a surgeon's knot. So I had started doing this, and then I would come back around, and I had much more tail than this, and I would put a little half knot or half bow on top of it. And one day I forgot. And I warped the entire loom and wove the entire project. And when I came to the front to remove my bows to get my project off, I suddenly realized I never put the bows on top. Oh, wow, maybe I don't need to do the bow step. So what I end up with is like this little short bit here that has to hang off. You need something to grab to do the ties. Now, the next thing I do that's a little bit off kilter is I go here to the outer edges of my loom. So I'm going to go to the right and the left of my warp. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to separate my ends, and then I'm going to do the same kind of knot. So I've got 2 legs. They're going to go over the apron rod. They're going to come, there we go, come up like a W, take left over right, right over left. It doesn't matter which way you go, as long as you just go over 2 times. So start your shoe tying with left over right, then go one more time with that same leg, so you've got it on twice, and then tighten that down. And again, you tighten it down, again, 2 legs over the apron rod, make the W. Left over right again, crank it down by pulling the wings out. And then I use my thumbs to kind of push the knot away from me so that when I pull down, it comes towards me. Now I'm going to come in and work from either side of the center. So it gets a little tricky. The only problem with doing this is you get into some tight spaces when you have something on the end here and you're trying to tie that last knot. I've gone over the apron rod. I'm going to come around, go once more, and crank it down. And that's all I'll do for the knot. Now, let me do another couple here, and then we'll come back and I'll just demonstrate how I tighten these. So, and again, like I said, there isn't a, this is the way you should do it. This is more of a, hey, here's a way that I found that works. And I stumbled upon the whole not doing the bow thing on top. But what I found is, you know, because I don't have problems with my hands, because I don't have arthritis at this point that's stopping me from doing things with these little short pieces, I didn't need nearly as much warp to do warp waste. So if I were to cut this off my loom, my warp waste would essentially be everything from here on. So that's what, maybe 5 or 6 inches. And, you know, you can shorten it at either end. The only advantage to having less warp waste is that, you know, if you've got a specialty skein of yarn, you don't have much of it for your warp, and you need to, you want to, you know, make sure you use it to its fullest and not waste any. This kind of is a technique that can help with that. If you're one of those people who consistently find that, you know, I get to the end of my pattern and, you know, it says to weave my scarf to 72 inches, but I can only get to 66. What you need to check for yourself is, well, what am I doing at the front end? And is that taking some of my warp out of the equation? Because, you know, once you've tied this knot on, even with a careful use of, you know, your waste yarns, whatever you've got from here on or from here back that you can't weave at that moment is what can't be woven. Now, a lot of people do like to cut their projects off rather than untie these knots. I actually, if I'm doing fringe, I don't usually count every bit of this waist as fringe. Like if we're talking about having, you know, a waist like this long, but I might count a good 2/3 of that because I know that these ends are slightly raggedy and I don't want those in my fringe, but I'll assume that I've got like 3 or 4 inches behind the knot that I can reclaim when it's done. Because like I said, all I have to do to reclaim this is take the tension off the front apron, and when it goes slack, you can pick those knots out. Now again, if you're working with a super fragile yarn, that may not be an option. So let's go back to the center, and I can see that these two in particular, I can feel with my fingers, these are all about the same tension, but these two are looser. So I'm going to pick up those same ends. I'm gonna tug, I'm bracing the palm of my hand or the wrist area of my hand against the apron rod just a little bit, pulling the knot toward the heddles and then pulling out. So you're gonna pull the knot up and then pull out on the wings. And then that will tighten up this knot. But I have never had it go loose. Not with something like cotton, not like with something like wool. And that's pretty much it. And then I just alternate sides. It's a fairly straightforward knot, and it also just isn't hard to do. Now, if you need, I mean, again, you could take this to the nth degree. I could probably tie this with an even shorter bit. But if you need longer, like let's say you have an issue with your hands, you have an issue with arthritis or something, or, you know, a problem with a thumb, whatever it is, I mean, by all means, you don't have to take it to the extreme.